This morning on The Real Story, the session is off to a busy start. We're talking to tenant organizers who spent hours testifying for more ethical evictions and other protections. What they have to say after the tense public hearing. We're breaking down policy with them ahead. But first, thousands of Connecticut residents are pleading for accountability as the wait times for wheelchair repairs get longer. Jonathan Sigworth tells us how he wants to stop the state from what he calls this nightmare and how the industry needs to change. Plus, as healthcare takes the stage this session, how available and accessible is it really for differently abled residents? That's next on The Real Story. Good morning and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. Wheelchair users across Connecticut are showing up at the Capitol this session asking for help. There are approximately 5,000 people in the state who rely on wheelchairs, otherwise known as complex rehabilitation technology or CRT. And even bigger picture, more than 613,000 adults here in Connecticut live with a disability, according to the CDC. Here with us now is Jonathan Sigworth, who suffered a spinal cord injury and is now a quadriplegic. He directed the award-winning documentary More Than Walking and founded the local organization by the same name. Thank you so much for being here with us, Jonathan.
Hey, thank you. Wonderful being here. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's start a little bit more, with who you are. For those who don't know, tell me a little bit about your story and how you started More Than Walking.
Sure. So I was 19 years old when I graduated from high school, took a year off between that and going to Wesleyan University to study world history and world religions, found myself in northern India with some other students. And on my way to class one morning, I lost control of a bicycle going around a corner on a footpath and fell 70 feet, landing on my head and becoming paralyzed below my arms and in my hands. So that was my introduction to the disability community in India, where my first friends, my first peer mentors, we didn't have the same language, didn't have the same religion, didn't have the same culture, but our disability brought us together. And I really felt at that moment that, wow, this is a really special community where we have so many things different between us, but our humanity is in common, and I've carried that through. And since then, I've wanted to use my disability as as a weapon to make this world more accessible and create equal opportunity for people with disabilities and in my condition through peer mentoring and film specifically. So my wife and I started More Than Walking back in 2017 in an effort to do that, to share peer mentor stories and independent living skills. And just in this last year, I've gotten involved in local advocacy efforts about wheelchair timeliness and other issues.
Well, and you've lived as someone, as you just explained, who both had the ability to walk and now someone who uses a wheelchair. So from that perspective, is there anything you've learned along the way so far that you wish people knew about your everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. My accident was 18 years ago, right? So I'm almost at that halfway mark. And, I've learned how to do everything independently, and independence has been the focus of my organization's work, right? Helping people become independent. And I've really learned that looks very different. You can be completely independent as a high-level quad who uses a power chair, who can't move anything below your neck. One of my colleagues runs another nonprofit and he can't move anything, below his shoulders. And he's doing great. He has a family. He's running an organization. He's doing amazing work. And the sky really is the limit. And so when from the advocacy point of view, when you're looking at issues like wheelchair repair, timeliness, where it takes us 2 months to get a wheelchair repaired, or if you look at Husky C, where in Connecticut where there's asset limits imposed on people who are not working with disabilities so that they can't save for their families' future. What's really holding us back has nothing to do with our disability. It's these systems around us that are refusing to evolve, are refusing to adapt, very much unlike how we have had to learn how to adapt. And this experience of getting a disability has also made it very clear to me that any of us can be in this position. You know, um, it can happen to any of us. I was doing extreme unicycling beforehand, uh, and then I got involved in wheelchair rugby, and I mean, there's so many things that can happen. But what limits us largely is not our disability; it's the structures around us.
Right. And to that end, here in Connecticut, you mentioned obviously doing advocacy now this session. So tell me a little bit about what you want to see state lawmakers focus on and make happen this session.
Sure. So, specifically with the wheelchair timeliness issue, I was part of a Connecticut task force that was created at the end of the last session, and we investigated, the root cause of these, on average, 2-month delays. And in fact, we've heard consumer stories where it takes years to resolve a wheelchair repair issue. And this is everything from I need a new joystick for my power chair to I need a new tire to I need a single cable to fix the connection between my joystick and my wheelchair, or I need a new battery. Like, these are not always the most complex things. And through this task force, we discovered that the two dominant companies that are national, they're private equity owned, they've consolidated competitors across all 50 states. Um, they're significantly understaffed. And so we are looking for the state legislator to impose timeline requirements for business days for a technician to come out to an individual's home to assess a repair. And then after all wheelchair parts, repair parts have come in and insurance authorization has come in, that they send another technician out within 4 business days to complete the repair. So, on average, what that would look like is taking a 2-month wait for a wheelchair repair fix to come down to at least 2 weeks. And in addition to that timeline requirement, we're also looking for reforms getting rid of prior authorization completely. It's kind of strange. You need a prescription and prior authorization to get a wheelchair, right, in the first place. But currently, you still need a prescription and insurance authorization to get that same chair repaired, which adds another 8 days to the whole process. That's 8 days of people not being able to go out to the community, of not being able to go to work, of being bedridden. And
Right.
so every single day counts. So getting rid of prior authorization, as well as covering preventative maintenance, like preventative healthcare, right? For us able-bodied folks,
Hmm.
we need preventative maintenance for our wheelchairs, and we also need repairs to our old wheelchairs so that we can use them as backup equipment
Right.
in the case of severe repair needs.
Right.
So those are some of the things we're looking for, and it won't cost that much to make those changes, especially the timeline mandates. And as you can imagine, the benefit is huge, including the cost benefit. I mean, if our wheelchairs are doing fine and we don't develop pressure sores, being bedridden, or have other injuries and require hospitalization, that saves the state money. So we're really looking for legislators to be our allies because they are our only voice. Our insurance requires us to use these two companies, and we have no other way of solving this issue.
And private equity, has really changed a lot of healthcare. We also see hospitals struggling financially post-COVID, and for some of them even before the pandemic, with things like staffing issues, inflation, some insurance coverage. Often in these conversations, hospitals remind people that they are in fact a business, and they say a business that isn't doing very well. Have you seen that impact the level of care and these bigger conversations about how hospitals can do better?
Yeah, well, in terms of hospitals, I mean, another important issue that's being raised by the Citizens Coalition for Equal Access is accessibility of medical diagnostic equipment. We're talking about imaging services, exam tables, scales. Currently, there's no state requirement or federal requirement for these MRIs, X-rays, exam tables to be accessible, for tables to be able to lift, to be able to raise up and down, for there to be Hoyer lifts, to be able to lift someone in a wheelchair onto a table. These are things that we require, for example, women to get mammograms to scan for breast cancer.
Yeah.
Currently, people are being turned away from these essential procedures because they're not accessible. So Citizens Coalition for Equal Access is demanding out of the Public Health Committee a bill to address this issue. There are federal recommendations since 2017 that lay out specific solutions to this issue. And it's just a matter of getting the will and putting the funding for equal access for people with disabilities in that regard.
And there are a lot of, sorry, continue.
No. That's how it relates to hospitals. Yeah.
Gotcha. So there are obviously a lot of other bills, being drafted around accessibility and healthcare this session, lots of different proposals, some we talked about, some we haven't. But, as an advocate behind some of these efforts, and you mentioned about how legislators and lawmakers are our voices at the Capitol, why do you think it's important people pay attention, talk to their lawmakers, or even go testify at public hearings?
This is not a disability issue. Any of us can become disabled at any point in our lives. And I would argue that perhaps the majority of us will at some point. We all may end up using canes or crutches towards the end of life. But this can change for any viewer in a split second, a car accident, what have you. And as it stands, these services are preventing us from retiring and saving. They're preventing us from having rainy day funds for emergencies. They're preventing us from getting back to work on time. They're preventing us from caring for our families. And so if you look at the medical diagnostic equipment issue, if you look at the Husky C issue, which is being advocated by the Husky Health, the Stop Husky Health Discrimination Coalition, these just make sense. I mean, some of these programs, they don't save the state any money regarding Husky C. All they do is require disabled people who have worked their whole lives and then go into retirement to impoverish themselves and their families in order to afford the 24/7 caregiving that they may need. This is a human rights issue. This is a disability rights issue, but any of us can fall into that situation. And yeah, it's a pretty scary thing to think about. But I think we all have an obligation to consider those possibilities and make sure that these policies are not making the situation worse and even more disabling.
Well, Jonathan, unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much again for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. And you can find out about the Wheelchair Reform Coalition at facebook.com/wheelchairreform or More Than Walking's efforts at morethanwalking.com/advocacy.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, there's still more to come, though, here on The Real Story. We're talking about renters' rights in Connecticut and what housing justice might look like in potential new laws. Joining us after the break, 2 local tenant organizers. Don't go anywhere.